é uma viagem que é precursora do Birthright, que eu não sei se vocês sabem, mas é uma viagem que existe, que é gratuita, que é para qualquer judia ou judeu conhecer Israel. Tem um filme agora que chama Israelism, que está circulando, já está no YouTube, que fala bastante sobre essa viagem. Eu teria muitas coisas para contar sobre essa época, mas o que eu quero contar aqui é a reação das pessoas quando eu comecei a perguntar por que aquilo estava acontecendo. Todos ficavam muito bravos com a minha pergunta e me respondiam coisas do tipo, porque eles querem jogar a gente no mar, e ficavam desacreditados que eu estava perguntando. Para mim, não eram respostas suficientes.
In fact, one of the ideas that Zionism is a movement which was created by the Jews. There is nothing further from the truth than this. In fact, the Jews were opposed Zionism, and mainstream Jewish organizations and Jewish populations, they opposed Zionism. Zionism began as a result of changes in the British Empire. In the 19th century, the British Empire, which was always opposed to using religion in the affair of the empire, changed their mind. They said, now we should use religion in the empire to control the natives better. And out of this idea, out of this connection between religion and empire, Zionism was born. In fact, the idea of Zionism, the basic idea of Zionism was announced by Reverend Louis Way, and he was evangelical, and he worked in London to convert Jews to Christianity. But then on the way, he began to think, to develop other thoughts, other theological thought. And the Protestant, in a way different from Catholics, they rely a lot on the Old Testament or the Bible, the Jewish Bible. And he said the following: we want Jesus to return, and Jesus, for some reason, is not returning, and we have to do something about it. There is a need for a human agency to bring about Jesus. And therefore he developed the following 3 stages scheme to help the return of Jesus. The first one is Jews must return to Palestine. Restoration of the Jews to Palestine. The Jews rejected Jesus in Palestine, and they should return back to Palestine. The second thing is that the return of the Jews will enable the clock of biblical prophecies to begin ticking. The clock of the Bible prophecies is stuck, and we should move it again, and we will move it by returning the Jews. The third thing is when they return there, they should, as a result of some historical development, they should accept Jesus, become Christian, and then the return of Christianity and the world, or the end of the world, will come. In fact, these ideas were announced 43 years before the birth of Herzl. 43 years before the birth of Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. Therefore, the idea of Zionism began with this evangelical minister. His disciple Nelson Darby added the term born-again Christian, and this is very important for today in the evangelical community. And in 1840, 20 years before the birth of Herzl, the British reformer Lord Shaftesbury wrote an article in the journal Quarterly Review, and he says, a people with no country for a country with no people. That Palestine was an empty country, there is nobody there, and the Jews are a people with no country, and we should match we should help these people to go to the land with, awaiting for no people. Lord Shaftesbury was a very important figure in the British Empire, and he convinced the government to talk with the ruler of Egypt and to seek his help to settle the Jews in Palestine. In fact, there were talks about it. What is important for us about this, that many historical figures, including American presidents, are born-again Christians, are evangelicals who believe in this theory of the return of the Jews to Palestine and the return of Jesus. And the list include Lord Balfour. We know who is Lord Balfour. David Lloyd, who was a British Prime Minister, and the President Wilson, Harry Truman, Ronald Reagan, and George W. Bush. Today, currently, most of the Zionists are not Jews. Most of the Zionists are Christians. The ratio of a Christian Zionist to Jewish Zionist is 1:30. And therefore, to begin to understand this, why the United States is supporting Israel, why the West is supporting Israel, and so on and so forth. The second important figure who wrote about Zionism and popularized Zionism among European public and the British public is the author George Eliot. And George Eliot, she wrote a book, Daniel Deronda, you see the book, 1876. And in the book, she talks about a Jew who grew up in an affluent, a British family, but he discovers his roots, and then he convinced the other that he should return to Palestine, and his rich family help him, the adopted family, he convinced them, and they helped him to return to Palestine. By the way, Balfour went to visit George Eliot a year after the publication of this book. Another relation between Eliot and Balfour is that both of them studied in an evangelical schools, and they received very strict evangelical education. Very important. We all know President Wilson, his points or his principle of the right of the people for self-determination, and they usually refer to him as an ideological president, as a president whose policy was guided by principles rather than by power. And after his announcement about the right of people for self-determination, the Jewish organization in the United States, they began to organize at that time, and they told him there is a problem. There is a kind of gap between your principle and what's going on in Palestine. And then he told one of the leaders of the Jewish community, as you see, don't worry, Dr. Wise, Palestine is yours. There is no regard to the people who lived in Palestine, or no regard to life of the people or any other consideration. It's as a gift. He would give it to Dr. Wise as if it was his own. And this is part of the colonial mindset, exactly the same way that they did in Australia, the same thing that they did in America, everywhere. Indigenous people have no right. They are not humans. They have no right. The right is decided by the European leader. The European leader decides who has right and who doesn't have right. Well, the racism against the Palestinians has been growing, and not just because of the Israel-Arab conflict, but in the case of the Palestinians, there is accumulation of racism. First of all, there is the anti-Arab racism. And Edward Said wrote his seminal book, Orientalism, about that. And there now, after 9/11, Islamophobia, another level. And now there is a new level, and which is the Palestinian political scientist Layla Abu Laban wrote anti-Palestinian racism, like the attack on the BDS, the attack of symbols of Palestine, like a flag, like kufiya and other things. And therefore there is accumulation of Western racism throughout the history. It's not that they are Arab, but they are also Muslims, and also they are Palestinians. And the late Palestinian sociologist Elias Zorek said, the whole mindset, the whole idea behind all of this accumulation of racism is to convince the people that the universal laws of humanities do not apply to the Palestinians. All the world love the Geneva Convention, the protection of civilians, and so on. But when it comes to the the right of self-determination, who is against the right of self-determination? But when it comes to the Palestinians, these principles are compromised. They always find reasons why these principles should not be applied to the Palestinians. And we should, I think, look a bit deeply about that point. I said before that Zionism was connected with European colonialism, and we can't separate that. To understand Zionism, to understand Israel, is to understand colonialism everywhere. It's part of that. It's part of the mindset, of the images, of the representations, and also of the Jews. Let's, for a minute, think about the Jews. Why should the Jews go to Palestine? Whom the Europeans sent to the colonies, their emissaries, the people who were supposed to spread the European civilization to the barbarians. If we look at Australia, the Brits used to send the convicts, people who were jailed for doing all kinds of felonies or crimes. They would send them to Australia. In Algiers, the French sent the poor and the criminal Parisians and the people who were expelled from the Alsace area after France was defeated by Germany. And there were this movement of refugees, and they sent the refugees to Algiers. Always the emissaries, or in most cases, probably America, the United States is a special case, but in most cases, Europeans send population who can't live in their society with dignity, who are not accepted in their society, and they are sent to the colonies. And in the colonies, they become the representatives of Western culture, of Western civilization. And these people, by the way, become the worst or the dark side of that civilization. We go back to Zionism, and Zionism, in fact, in Palestine borrows most of the expressions, most of the language, the discourse, and the images that the Europeans has used in the colonies all along. And therefore, to Europeans, these images are familiar. This is part of their culture. It's in their novels. It's in their main texts. The philosophers, the European philosophers wrote about that. And these images are so familiar to Europeans because it's part of the heritage of colonialism. We spoke about land without people, and in Israel the idea is that Palestine was a deserted land without people. And let's look at the quotations from Prime Minister and the Nobel Prize laureate Shimon Peres. What he speak about the Palestinians, he said, the land to which they came, the Zionist settlers, while indeed the Holy Land was desolate and inviting, land that had been laid waste, thirsty for water, filled with swamps and malaria, lacking in natural resources, and so on. And he says at the end, And the return of Zion was accomplished by ceaseless violent clashes with a small Arab population. The Arab population are a small population. When in fact, at the time of Balfour Declaration, the Jews were only 9% of the population. That small Arab population are 91% of the population. The Jews were 9%. The settlers, the Palestinians were 91%. And Shimon Peres, the man of peace, who is considered in the West as a man of peace, a moderate politician, this is exactly what he thought. And we learn then one of the historians of the Jewish settlements in Palestine, he says that the people were told before they came to Palestine that it's your land. You go there, you are the masters, it's your land. And when people came, they found Arab. And they were surprised. Some were surprised, and there were violent clashes with the Palestinians because they believed, they came with the idea that these people do not exist. There must be something wrong because they were told that Palestine was an empty land. You know, this reminds me with the British criminals who were sent to Australia. These people would stay years in jails in the cold cells of Britain, were sent to Australia. These people, most of them, were unable to walk or to communicate with other humans because they received the minimum calories to keep them alive, and were put in very cold cells. And when they went to Australia, the journey was more than 1 month. And at the beginning, these people had to recover. They put them on the deck, on the sun, to recover. And then they were taught that they are going to have a new life, to open a new page, and they are going to an empty land, and they will be the masters of that land. And exactly the same with Zionist settlers. You are going there, it's your land, you can do with it, you know. You are the landlord, you are the lord of the land. You can do whatever you think appropriate. And look at the idea of how the natives, what Iara was saying was in fact part of the mindset of colonialism. And look at what Churchill, he often dubbed in the West as the lion of freedom. And what he says, he said these words to the Palestine Investigation Committee in 1937. There was a British committee went to Palestine to investigate the clashes between Jews and Palestinians. In fact, the Palestinian revolt, and they interviewed, part of the people who were interviewed was Churchill. Churchill says the following: I don't agree that the dog in a manger has the right to the manger, even though he may have laid there for a long time. And he says about all the people, the natives in America and in Australia and so on. He said, these are just like the dogs. As the dog can live in the abode, but he can't own it. And this is with these Palestinians. Just the same right as the dog has to his abode. So, what to do with what the Jewish settlers were sent to do what other settlers were sent. And here is Herzl tells us they should form part of a wall in defense for Europe, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. The Arabs, these are the barbarians, and we shall defend Europe. We hear this discourse nowadays by some of the Israeli armed companies, particularly those who are working with surveillance and implanting programs to spy on people. They say, we are defending Europeans against Islamic terrorism. And we are developing, in fact, we know in Latin America and other places, they are implanted in the telephones of human rights activists of people with political ideas who are opposing their dictatorships, or people who have some independent ideas. Therefore, the mindset we have to understand that how this part of larger colonial mindset, ideas, and sometimes some people in the left have no alternative to answer this, and sometimes they accept that there is some truth to this. Well, go back to Palestine, and one of the other methods is making the desert bloom.
The translators are asking to speak a bit closer.
Yeah, to make the desert bloom, and in fact they said there is a lot of areas which are not cultivated in Palestine, and we will cultivate them. We live beside the Palestinians, and we cultivate these lands which are not cultivated. But in 1905, one of the Zionist leaders, his name is Yitzhak Epstein, in fact, gave a presentation at the 7th Zionist Congress. And he said, let's be true with ourselves. Let's speak the truth. The truth is there is not an inch of uncultivated land. The Palestinians cultivated even land, which is very difficult to cultivate. And therefore, we are in trouble. We have to think about ways to work and to build settlements. And the Jewish colonies, in fact, did not provide much food for Jewish settlers. And the land they were able to acquire was just a small amount, 7% of the land of Palestine. The other interpretation of making the desert bloom is, in fact, now all the world speak about turning the globe into green, this green movement. And Israel prides itself by planting 240 million trees in Palestine since 1948. And one of the main projects was to plant trees, 6 million trees, to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust. But if we look at one of the main figures in the GNF, and he says, no, the truth is that we are planting these trees to hide the remains of Palestinian villages that we destroyed. The other kind of presentation is now bringing civilization to the Palestinians, to the barbarians, civilizing the white man's burden, that we are bringing civilization to these natives, to these barbarians. And if we look at the second, in fact, a professor at one of the American universities looked at the cultural production of the main figures who wrote in Hebrew before 1948 and about a bit after 1948, about the founding father of Hebrew literature in Palestine, and look at what they say. He says that their stories and what they wrote, their cultural production, is not any different from what the white settlers wrote in the deep south of America or in South Africa. So it's just the same stories, with different names, with different places, but mainly the same stories, the same ideas, the same mindset. The other idea, which is relatively new, to say that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel is democracy, and therefore it has the right. It has a moral weight. Therefore, democracy give it a kind of moral authority. Israel can judge itself, can reflect on its deed because it is democracy. And one Israeli sociologist said, when people began to debate, to take seriously this claim about democracy, says, come on, there is a problem with Israel democracy, deep problems. One of the problem is that between 1948 and 1966, there was a military government over the Palestinians. And the military government is antithetical to democracy, is against democracy. You can't put people under military rule and say this is democracy, and these are citizens living in a democracy. And therefore, Israel was not democracy. And now Israel is ruling and has been ruling, not as a temporary stage, but forever, people who are not citizens. Therefore, what kind of democracy is? And he developed a model called ethnic democracy. Means that the Jews are majority and they are using the state for their benefit. But then in 2018, Israel passed a law called the nation state of the Jewish people. According to this law, Israel is defined as the state of the Jewish people, and the only people who have right for self-determination in Israel are the Jews. And the Jews are not the Jewish citizens of Israel, but like Iara, people who are invited to be. Any Jew who just travel to Israel, he can get Israeli citizenship, Israeli passport, and so on. And also that law says that the state will be used to establish Jewish settlements and to further the Zionist project, where these settlements will be built on land confiscated from Palestinians. Simple and straightforward. And the state is a kind of tool to further these goals. And I'll skip, just go to policies and go to the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was given to the Jewish people 1917, and it commits the British government to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. That the establishment of a Jewish state became a project formally of the British government. And then look at Balfour, what he says. He says Zionism is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, and in future hopes of far profounder import than the desires and the prejudices of 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that ancient land. Why ancient land? The land was created at once. Why that ancient land? We should remember the Bible. Go back to the Bible and the stories, and to his kind of fundamentalist, Christian fundamentalist belief, his evangelical belief. Well, the policies that Israel has pursued were always policies that were drawn from the repertoire of colonialism, and anybody who studied colonialism, who know a bit about colonialism, can identify Israeli policies as a product of colonialist project. Look at in 1920, after Balfour Declaration, Weizmann, who was the head of the World Zionist Organization, went to Palestine, and he said to see the bride that the British gave. And before his arrival, he received kind of policies, what we should do to further the Zionist project. And here are the points, but look at the fifth point, that the Zionist movement will instigate hostilities between Christians and Muslims in Palestine. Divide and rule. Let the natives kill each other. And this is obvious colonial policy. After 1948, I said Israel was not democracy, it was a military rule. And one of the Israeli lawyers who opposed, in fact, these were British regulations which were imposed in various parts of the empire, but imposed in Palestine to fight Jewish terrorism, Shamir and other organizations. And one of the lawyers said, Yaakov Shimshon said, these laws or these regulations, even in Nazi Germany, there were no such laws. And the old Jewish lawyers opposed these defense regulations. After 1948, the same Yaakov Shimshon became the legal advisor to the Israeli government who imposed these laws, these regulations. Well, then Palestinians remained in Israel after 1948, military government imposed, and the question was why these Palestinians remained. This is a very important issue. Always the Israelis said, we did not expel Palestinians. The fact is that there are Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, like me, in fact, like my family. How comes if Israel wanted to drive you out, how comes that you live in Israel and you have Israeli passport, although at the airport they treat you like far worse than foreigners. But anyway, you have Israeli passport and you have Israeli citizenship and you have the right to vote. And in fact, all the Israeli political class were very angry at 48 at the main politicians and the military commanders. And I looked at the archives, the Israeli archive of the Labor Party, and the political class, all the political class was very angry. How comes that these people remain? And the idea was these people will remain for a while, we will kick them one day. But then the question remains, why did we allow them? And the answer is, which Sharet gives, who was the foreign minister, said we allowed them because there were pressure in the United Nations for ceasefire, and we wanted to reach the border. And what we did is a Spencer operation, they call it. The army comes from both sides to reach the international border, and as a result, a lot of civilians remained behind the lines of the Israeli army. And Moshe Dayan, one of the leaders of the Israeli army then, and then became Minister of Defense and so on, many positions, high positions in Israel. And he said, had we occupied that place, the Galilee, like other places, their fate would have been the same as the fate of others that we expelled. And he says that openly. Well, it was a closed meeting. It was confidential. They didn't know that someone like me will come after so many years to dig in the archive and to look at these things. In 1958, they were sure that these Palestinians will stay for a long time. They were so disheartened that these people will stay with us for a long time. And what should we do with them? Then all the security and political apparatuses came together and they drew a plan. And the plan was built on three principles. The first principle, we can't expel them in peacetime. That's a problem. The Arab states are not fighting us, and only in war we can expel them. The Arab states are not coming back to us, and we can't expel them and to say, they collaborated with Arab armies. The second thing is that the Palestinians will never be equal citizens in Israel. They will always remain at the periphery of Israeli society, the labor market, and the polity. And the third, security considerations. We should look at what the army, the security services say, and rule them by this rationale of security. And they draw a kind of scheme of control, which is very interesting. In fact, Foucault should learn from them. They were far more sophisticated than Foucault before Foucault. And we study Foucault at the universities and so on. And they decided, one of the ideas was that we should connect Arab villages to electricity. Why? It's nice to have electricity. But no, this was not the reason, because it was nice. They said we can see them during the day, but we don't know what they do. Who meets with whom during the night? We should put them under our eye at day and night, and for that, we should connect them to electricity. I'm sure that Foucault couldn't think of that. The other thing is to introduce elected leadership in Arab villages, councils, city councils, and so on, for debate, for democracy. Exactly the principle of democracy. We are democratizing the Arabs. But here we find a secret document from 1958 says, we should introduce democracy in order to make them fight against each other. Because through democracy, the resources are very scarce, are very few, scarce resources, and we should divide them. How should we divide them? By introducing this kind of democracy, supposedly. And by the way, I looked at the archives, and all the parties that were participating were connected with the Labour Party. And the Labour Party went with various families and make these families compete with each other, sometimes fight with each other for the resources. And democracy is good for us. We are bringing democracy to the Arabs, democratizing the Arabs. I'll skip these things, but just go to the end, to the 1968. And 1968, there was another plan, and please look at C, the last page. See the demography and say, and the idea was, we have a problem. There are too many Arabs, and we should engineer how to reduce the natural growth of the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. And they came with various ideas. One of the ideas is to introduce family planning, to persuade people to use contraception, to have less children. And the other idea is to teach women. And they found in the research, social science research, and here is social science research sometimes is used by governments to control the people. They said we should give more opportunities to women to study. And as the level of education rises, the number of children in the family is decreasing. And therefore, we should try to engineer that population and reduce its rate. Well, I can continue with that. One of the ideas was to connect these ideas with what's going on in Gaza, why the West is supporting Israel in Gaza. There is common heritage, common legacy, common concepts, common ideas. And beside that, we have some people who have this evangelical belief of the return of Jesus and so on. Therefore, there is Palestinian exceptionalism. As Elia Zorek said, the laws that govern humanity is not effective, is not applicable to the Palestinians. And therefore, what we see in Gaza is acceptable to many. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Ahmad. Acho que a essa altura ele já entende muito obrigada. E, bom, então eu gostaria de abrir para perguntas do público. Perguntas breves, por favor, né, objetivas, e a gente pode fazer rodadas de perguntas. Vocês podem vir aqui na frente e fazer a pergunta no microfone.
Professora, só uma questão técnica. Esse código a gente tem que digitar onde?
No link do QR Code. O link do QR Code é para quem está inscrito. Daí entra no link onde tem lá a planilha de presença e o código é o que vai dar acesso à planilha, porque toda sessão tem um código novo. Obrigada. Pode vir aqui na frente perguntar no microfone, por favor. Não, aqui.
Hello, good night. I just want to ask you, what do you think about the future of Israel? I mean, a lot of commentators are saying that Israel probably will disappear because it's creating conditions for its end. In your opinion, how this process will end and what will come next?
Obrigada. Se não tiver outra, já eu passo para a resposta. Ah, Bruno, just one more question.
Yeah, sure.
Obrigado, Ahmad, pela sua apresentação. Minha pergunta é a seguinte: recentemente houve um evento aqui na U. Sorry. Obrigado pela sua apresentação. Minha pergunta é a seguinte: recentemente houve um evento aqui na USP que falou sobre especificamente o antissemitismo islâmico, né? E eu gostaria de ouvir de você, né? De onde surge esse tipo de ideia que busca colocar o povo islâmico como essencialmente odioso dos judeus? Isso seria algo, inclusive, ancestral, que os judeus no mundo árabe islâmico seriam historicamente oprimidos. Isso está nas representações sionistas a respeito da vida dos judeus no Oriente Médio anteriormente. Eu gostaria de que você pudesse expor um pouco mais para as pessoas como era a vida dos judeus e dos árabes historicamente, antigamente, para a gente entender, né, porque muito se justifica o empreendimento sionista a partir dessa repressão que os judeus supostamente sofriam antes. Se pudesse elaborar um pouquinho disso, eu agradeço.
E tem mais uma pergunta, acho que uma rodada de 3 perguntas está ótimo. Vem, pode vir aqui.
Boa noite, obrigado pela palestra, obrigado Iara também. Queria fazer uma pergunta para os dois. Você falou muito do contexto desses primeiros anos da colonização da Palestina, principalmente desse regime militar que os palestinos sofriam. Durante esse período também chegaram a Israel imigrantes judeus de países árabes. Como é que se deu essa relação entre os sionistas de origem europeia, os judeus árabes recém-chegados e os palestinos e esses judeus árabes? E aí também perguntar para a Iara, ela que tem essa vivência, como é que funciona enfim, como é que essas relações raciais dentro de Israel e das comunidades judaicas que habitam Israel?
Muito obrigada. Vou passar para o Ahmad e depois para a Iara.
Well, thank you. There are 3 questions. The first about the disappearance of Israel. I think it's premature to think in this direction. There are vested interests in the sustainment of Israel. And if we remember that the people fought against apartheid because of moral outrage all over the world, and the number of people who were killed by the apartheid regime in South Africa were 21,000 black South Africans only. In relation to what's going on in Palestine now, 44,000. And we don't find this moral outrage. And therefore, the pressure from below, the pressure of the people against the continuation of Israel is not showing the same intensity as the people protested against South Africa. And therefore, the problem that I see in Israel is that part of the high-tech companies, the educated and so on, people would begin leaving Israel because of 2 reasons. One reason is the occupation, but this is not the main reason. The main reason is that Israel is becoming a religious state. And these people want to live in an open, liberal, secular society. They don't want the Jewish religious laws being imposed on their daily life. this could be one of the catalysts, one of the movements that would weaken Israel. But I think for the foreseeable future, I guess Israel will continue, and if Israel ceases to exist, I think the final stages of colonialism are the most dangerous, are the most macabre, are the most, which contain the most violent act against the natives. And we see that in the West Bank, we see that in Gaza, how people are happy to kill, to oppress, to uproot. This kind of deep desire to harm. And this is, I think this will become much more when Israel is weakened, and this is quite dangerous. The other question about Jews in the Arab countries, from the Arab countries who came to Israel. There were two levels. One level is that there was a discrimination against them, and an Israeli document they say, we don't want to be another Middle Eastern country. Israel should not deteriorate to become part of this barbarian milieu in the Middle East. The other part is that these people try to hide their identity or their relation to the Arabs and to affiliate themselves with Ashkenazi Jews. One professor in my university, in fact, when she was young, she was from an Arab country, and she created a story for herself that her parents were in the concentration camps and were killed in the Holocaust. Because to be, part of the Israeli elite, to be part of the Israeli story, and part of the Israeli fundamental Israeli story that connects Israelis together is the Holocaust, and the idea that Israel was created to shelter the survival of the Holocaust. And she wanted to be part of that group, and she just invented a story about her grandparents and were killed in the concentration camps and so on. And I have one student, in fact, he told me his parents were from Morocco, and he was ashamed when he went with them because they didn't speak Hebrew fluently. He was ashamed. They spoke Arabic between them, his father and mother. And he said he was so much ashamed of them and asked them all the time, in public, you just shut up, let me talk. I studied in Israeli university, I can speak Hebrew. And therefore, this is this double kind of standard. From one side, they are oppressed. From the other side, they are try to identify with the Ashkenazi elite. In fact, there are a lot of sad stories about them when they came. One of the stories is that they settled them in houses that were left by the Palestinian refugees. But then Jewish immigrants from Romania came and said, Jews from Romania, these are Europeans, are accustomed to a different lifestyle, and therefore they can't live in tents, possibly. And they took the Moroccans out of the buildings, put them in tents, and they brought in the Romanians. And this is a true story, and there is documentation about that. Yeah, and this is kind of, even today, look at the Ethiopians. These stories are there even today, but they try all the time to identify, to be more Catholic than the Pope, to be part of. And in fact, to be Israeli, there is a book written by Israeli sociologist Kimmerling. He writes about the rise and decline of Israeliness. And to be Israeli means to be a European who migrated to Palestine before 1948, your parents at least, and there is a kind of sensitivities and mindset that is peculiar to this group, and other groups can't be really Israeli. They can aspire to be Israeli, they can be close, they can be educated, but they are not real Israelis. Real Israelis are settlers who came before 48 and who built the state and who went to the army and so on. And even now, if we look at, for example, the army, units, the secret units, the units which are very prestigious in Israel, are usually manned, or the recruits come from this Jewish Ashkenazi milieu, like Unit 8,200, which is about electronic surveillance and so on. And these people who, after their service in the state, in the army, go and establish their companies and develop these surveillance devices and programs and so on. Almost more than 90% of them are Ashkenazi, and these people are becoming super rich. They get salaries like $1 million a year from various regimes and various countries to track dissidents and to track, in some countries, homosexuals or all kinds of groups, according to the regime. And they develop these programs and work for these regimes and become super rich in Israel. Yeah, and we see this is continued. The question about how Arabs and Jews lived in the history. I guess like all other groups, but there is one thing in the Arab culture which is sometimes for us is very difficult to understand European racism, because in Arab society, if you adopt the cultural norms, you become an Arab. For example, I'll give you, there are Palestinians who are part of the Palestinian leadership, but not Palestinians. In fact, I wrote about a mayor of a village called Kufr Yassif. And his father came from Greece to Palestine, and he became part of the Palestinian community. His son went to school with the children, and if you go to school with the children, you are become part of them. And he became mayor, and then after 48, Israeli army came to expel refugees who found refuge in that village. And that mayor went and slept on the street in front of the Israeli trucks and told them, go over my body. I will not allow you to come to the village and to expel these people. And he is a Greek, his father was a Greek, and the refugees were Muslims in his village. And therefore, for another example, probably it's, we are getting late and I'm giving too much examples, but a lot of Palestinian Christians used to go to study in mosques. One of the Palestinian novelists and educator, very famous, called Hanna Abu Hanna, he studied in the mosque, and he knows the Quran far better than many Muslims. And therefore, for Jews as part of Palestinian society, they were accepted. They have their kind of belief, and people accepted that. But when Zionism came, it was a different. And also, in relation to the other question about the Oriental Jews, the Oriental Jews always use the Arabic language. In Arabic, you call the European Khawaja, Sir. And Sir with reference to European. And these Jewish immigrants who came to Palestine used the same donation, or the same, the way they addressed the European Jews with that name. They said Khawaja. And there is a funny story. One guy was part of the Communist Party in Iraq, and he came to Palestine, and he joined the Communist Party in Israel. And the security came to him and told him he should be member of the party. And in Israel was to be member of the party, to be member of the Zionist Labor Party. And his wife said, strange, he went to the party, in fact. And when he came, his wife told him, people from the party were looking at you. He said, strange, I was at the headquarters of the party. And tell me, is he Khawaja or Ibn Arab? Is he Khawaja, is he European or an Arab? Because he thought of himself as an Arab. To be Arab is culture. And sometimes there were, clashes between all kinds of groups, but all in all, this is basically the principles in Arab culture until recently. And unfortunately, recently, the European ideas are getting in with secularization, with looking with xenophobia,
unfortunately, this is getting in.
Thank you, Ahmad. Obrigada. Vou também responder com exemplos. Eu pensei em 2 exemplos. Eu vou falar só da questão da convivência, né, de judeus de descendência europeia e judeus de descendência árabe na comunidade judaica aqui em São Paulo. Eu tenho 2 pequenas histórias, né? Uma eu tenho uma amiga desde os 8 anos de idade, e só quando eu voltei da Palestina e comecei a falar também da diferença das relações entre judeus de descendência árabe e judeus de descendência europeia em Israel, que ela me contou que a mãe dela era iemenita. Eu não sabia. Eu tinha 27 anos de idade, né? Fazia 20 anos que a gente se conhecia. E eu perguntei para ela, como é que você nunca me contou isso? Aí ela falou, porque me tratam estranho quando eu conto. E agora que você está me contando isso, que você consegue ver esse racismo, esse preconceito, agora eu me senti à vontade de te contar. Foi bem impactante para mim isso. E outra história é a escola que eu trabalhei, a escola judaica que eu trabalhei há alguns poucos anos, era uma escola de uma comunidade de descendência libanesa, né? A grande maioria dos estudantes. E aí, eu acho que eu já estava meio estranha, meio para fora da comunidade, alguma coisa, ou não tão ashkenazi, não tão de descendência europeia, não sei, por causa de todas as reflexões que eu já vinha fazendo, que eu conseguia observar as relações que se estabeleciam entre os judeus ali, e eu ia fazendo perguntas, ia conversando com as pessoas. Então, tinha professores de reza, a grande maioria eram de descendência libanesa, e tinha uma forma de rezar específica. E tinham alguns professores que eram de descendência europeia. E aí eles ensinavam outro jeito de rezar. E uma vez conversando com um professor de reza de descendência libanesa, ele estava muito bravo, falando de como que o cara vai ensinar a reza deles e que ele não fala algumas palavras em árabe, que é da tradição deles, e que ele fala que é feio falar em árabe. E aí eu falei, mas por que você não fala isso para o rabino, né? Ou para outras... Porque o rabino também acho que é nazi. Também é de descendência europeia, eu não vou falar nada. Ele ficava engolindo a raiva e a opressão em relação à cultura dele numa escola que era de famílias de maioria da cultura dele. Mesmo assim, eles ficavam segurando e tendo que mudar coisas.
Obrigada, Iara. Muito bem. Rita.
Bom, vou tentar elaborar aqui uma questão que me preocupou nas várias falas, especialmente quando se for... Eu vou pedir para refletir um pouquinho sobre essa perspectiva da derrota de Israel enquanto uma entidade de apartheid, genocida, enfim. Hoje, nós estamos aqui discutindo a vida no interior de Israel, algo, né, da vida palestina no interior, algo que não se tinha antes e que isto é visto como um momento que pode ser um momento de superação, né, do apartheid, da colonização. E aí o senhor fala do fim da colonização como um momento que pode ser muito mais dramático, talvez. Eu não sei se tem situação mais dramática do que estamos vivendo hoje. Mas é porque eu estou tratando disso e já vou concluir, é porque nós vemos também, quando enxergamos Israel, ao mesmo tempo nós estamos enxergando o sistema internacional como um todo. Então, se Israel está em xeque, tem uma organização mundial que o sustenta, que também está exposta. E eu queria lhe perguntar se essa possibilidade, não só do colonialismo, mas do sistema que sustenta, né, que não é só colonial, né, de dominação econômico, enfim, se derrotar Israel significa também alterar, enfrentar e até sofrer com essa situação mais grave que pode ser imposta, né, para os povos, para a humanidade. Então, derrotar Israel é também derrotar o sistema? Estou falando de derrotar Israel como uma entidade ocupante e de apartheid e de genocídio. Obrigada.
Pode fazer sua pergunta. Vamos tentar fazer breve.
Breve. Obrigado. Aprendi muito com os dois e aprendi muito sobre a história que nós não sabemos da origem do sionismo. Então, agradeço muito isso, e se pudéssemos, enfim, colocar isso depois em escrito, porque aqui não sabemos bem, confundimos o nascimento do sionismo como com Hertz, e o senhor esclareceu isso, e é muito importante. Então, muito obrigado. Mas a minha pergunta é outra. A minha pergunta é, eu sou mais otimista. Israel não dura 15 anos, e o motivo é simples. O orçamento de Israel, a vida econômica de Israel, depende de financiamento direto dos impostos dos americanos. Ou seja, é um subsídio direto do governo americano. Os Estados Unidos estão numa crise profunda, o dólar, em poucos anos, não será mais moeda, não valerá nada, então ninguém irá, em cerca de 15 anos, ninguém quererá o dólar, e então Israel não terá financiamento. Acabou Israel.
Mais alguma pergunta? Sim. Depois dela, mais uma pergunta. Ok, 4 perguntas nessa rodada, 5 para a próxima. Mas a próxima vai ser a última, deixa eu avisar aqui, olhando o tempo.
Me chamo Giane, gostaria de agradecer pelo evento. Eu comecei esse ano a tentar aprender um pouco sobre a questão. E me surgiu uma dúvida agora, inclusive em relação à última pergunta. Aqui, pelo menos, se fala sobre essa questão de quanto tempo vai durar Israel, como que vai ser o futuro da questão palestina e de Israel. Eu gostaria de saber se vocês poderiam me dizer como que, se esse questionamento rola por lá, em Israel, na Palestina, como que se fala sobre isso? Não sei se eu me coloquei muito...
Claro, muito claro. Ok, começar de novo com Ahmad.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by the last question about Israel future, and we also have to think about probably the opposite thing. What Palestinian population that will remain after that? People traumatized? Every Palestinian in Gaza knows at least one person who is killed. Children. Think about the children who have no home, who saw this bombing. And about this bombing, the bombs that Israel dropped on Gaza are more in quantity and strength than all the bombs that were dropped during World War II on London, Dresden, and Hamburg together. It's like an atomic bomb. Think about these children. What kind of children will the people who will grow up, the next Palestinian generation, we have to think about that. Think about Algiers. Even now, after so many years, Algiers gained independence in 1962. Until now, the people of Algiers are traumatized by French colonialism, which was similar to the methods used by Israel. France just used their airplane and dropped napalm on villages and put people in concentration camps like the Germans did to the Jews. They traumatized the Algerian population. And now, to expect, just an easy fix to that problem, I think this is an issue which would take a lot of time to heal. These children will have children, and their children will relive the trauma of their parents. And this will continue for many generations to come. The future is bleak regardless if Israel continued or not continued. And this we should keep in mind also. Look, these people who saw their home is destroyed, their family is killed, or even people who were fortunate enough to move from the whole family, to move from one place to another in Gaza, they suffer food insecurity, hunger. How can these people have a trust in the world after all that? According to one recent research, 8 out of 9 Palestinian children are deeply traumatized. There are no psychologists, no hospitals, nobody to help, no parents to help. Adults at least could give some comfort, but now the adults themselves are traumatized and can't provide this comfort. Who is going to give this comfort? Who is going to help? Who is going to explain? Who is going to give a meaning to all of that? The meaning of this carnage, of mass killing. This will haunt these people, these children for all their life, and their children, and what kind of Palestinian society will remain after that? I remember from 1948, my parents remained and became citizens of Israel and so on. I remember for years at night, I used to get up and find my mother crying because her family was expelled. And and she herself was traumatized, and she had to run, and she lost her family for 21 days, and she was just in the bushes looking for somebody whom she probably knew that could help her to find her parents and so on. And for years she was crying about that and so on. But look at the children now in relation to her story. Her story is really, like a footnote in a book, like something mild in relation to what these children are undergoing now. And I have no answer. I think it's impossible. It's inhuman to think that these people will tomorrow forget everything and, open a new page. The question about we are watching what's going on, and Israel is becoming, labeled as apartheid state, and all the world is looking at it. That's true, but the problem is that we are living in a forgetting world. The world is forgetting. Who remembers what the French did in Algiers? Millions of Algerians were killed from the beginning. The military leader who occupied Algiers, he said, we should not go to villages and kill the men. We should go to the mountains, to the caves, and kill the women and the children and burn them all. We should cut the trees. We should seal the wells of water. We should chase them to the end, to the desert. And this is the leader of the French army. And look at Algiers now, they are unable to recover. But who is remembering that? We're living in a forgetting world, and it's probably we, the intellectuals, discuss these things, but ordinary people have their back-breaking life in this neoliberal system. People have just to make living, to put food on their tables, and life is becoming more and more difficult to ordinary people. There is the mortgages, house shortage, and so on. People have their own life, and life is becoming exceedingly difficult. I am teaching now I'm not teaching, doing research in Germany. I had a very interesting conversation with a German woman, one woman who works there in the administration of the institute in which I work. She told me, I am lucky, I am 50, sorry, and I have pension from the state, and I studied for free from the state. I was shocked. People look at death as salvation in this life. People began to look at, feel fortunate. I lived in a system where they provided free education, free healthcare, and so on, and my children will not have these benefits. As if, I made it, I survived, which is very bleak outlook to the life. Life should be joyful. People should create in their life, make meaning in their life, have calling in their life, do things that is meaningful to them, or not to think that I am so fortunate that I'm old, I'll die, but I had the benefits in the past, the state gave me the benefits and so on. How these people will remember Palestine and think about Palestine? These people don't have time for that. We in the academia, the academia, they don't think for a long time we will have this privilege to think and to reflect. We'll become a company, another company called academia, with the privatization of universities and so on. Yes, and therefore the world is not liking Israel now, but who knows? Might be another Shimon Peres who said about man of peace, who said about the Palestinians were a small population and so on. Just spoke about peace and everybody will be pleased and so on. And negotiations after negotiations and peace will never be achieved. But the idea that the people will have these ideas forever and these feelings forever, I am a bit doubtful about it. I tend to believe that we are living in a forgetting age. And one catastrophe after the another, the clean catastrophe, the Palestinian catastrophe, here and there and so on. And, but also we began to develop immunity to the violence. On television there is violence, everywhere there is violence, in the streets violence. And we developed immunity to violence. We look at violence as something normal, as part of life, rather than something abnormal, something that we should fight for and condemn and so on, and work against and so on. And therefore, I don't believe that after 10 years, if you ask many people about what the war in Gaza, they will remember much, or they have much to say, or they have a strong feeling about it. Ask the young generation about the Soviet Union. How many think of the people, the young generation remember the Soviet Union, or think about socialism, or have any utopia? We are living in a world without utopia, and this is what I personally frightens me. We lost the utopia. There is no utopian thinking anymore. We don't aspire to a better future. We just try to manage to survive like a mice in a maze, how to solve our little problems and to find our ways and to live our small life. That's really very hard. Unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic for Palestine, but more than that, I'm not very optimistic for humanity. The violence has passed the threshold. Then the repetition of such massacres will become permissible. We saw that. We are accustomed to these scenes, and we in the future probably will tolerate them. This is what is frightening about the implication of Gaza. Thank you.
Última rodada de perguntas antes da gente encerrar.
Boa noite, me chamo Daniel, estou vindo do Rio de Janeiro. Professor Ahmad, quando você fala muito interessante, né, das formas de controle de natalidade na Palestina. Isso quer dizer que ter uma família maior, ter mais filha, também é uma estratégia de resistência dos palestinos, né? Como que essa estratégia fica agora, né, depois desse ano em Gaza, considerando o que acontece na Cisjordânia? E também se é uma estratégia israelense, ter uma família maior.
Oi, boa noite. Também agradeço muito, parabéns pelo dia, pela noite, pela palestra. Eu queria trazer uma pergunta para a atualidade de Israel com essa situação em Gaza, no Líbano. Como que está essa resistência dentro de Israel? Ahmad, eu não sei se você continua lecionando na Universidade Ben-Gurion em Israel, ou seja, como um palestino israelense vivendo em Israel, o que você falou hoje aqui, você teria liberdade de falar em Israel hoje? E como que está os movimentos em Israel de resistência a tudo isso? O Breaking the Silence, a juventude que resolve não ir ao exército e vai presa. Como que está isso? O que a gente ouve aqui é que uma porcentagem mínima de israelenses realmente são contra o que está acontecendo. Eu queria ouvir de vocês um pouco isso.
Boa noite. Minha pergunta é um pouco sobre o imaginário que as pessoas têm sobre essa questão e sobre os judeus, o Estado de Israel, a Palestina, os árabes, os muçulmanos, baseada na Declaração de Independência de Israel e da Palestina. Porque quando eu li, eu senti que a de Israel passava assim um clima de paz, de harmonia, de tranquilidade, e a da Palestina ela é bastante bélica, bastante enfática na questão de vamos à luta. Nossos jovens devem, não só podem, mas devem morrer pela nossa causa. E eu acho que isso é transmitido para o imaginário popular bastante nesse sentido, de que a Palestina, essa região, a população lá, é agressiva e quer atacar. Seria mais ou menos nesse sentido.
Mais alguma? Podemos encerrar as perguntas.
Can I answer this now?
Yes.
A lot of
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the questions. Very interesting, and I want to begin with the last one about Israel Declaration of Independence. Do you know when this declaration was written and why?
1958 again?
No, 48, during the war. Yeah. And why it was written? Under what circumstances? It was written in the middle of the war, when Israel ethnically cleansed 95% of the Palestinians who were supposed to be citizens of the Jewish state, of the part of Palestine that was allocated to the Jewish state. Basically, it was written when there were no Palestinians. And therefore, this declaration, which says about equality and citizens of Israel and so on, was written for the world public opinion and not to be implemented. The second point is that it was used in the court, brought in the court in support of various cases, and the judges in Israel said that this declaration does not constitute a legal document. You can't use it to ask for more rights. And therefore, it's another expression of that imagination that was created, these myths that were created around Israelis and Palestinians, which block people from thinking and seeing what is actually happening. This declaration has no relevance to the Palestinians. In fact, it was written in order to appease the world public opinion, European countries, and to justify the creation of the State of Israel. Because at that time, various countries began to think that probably establishing a Jewish state is not a good idea. Probably we should think about other solutions. And then came with this document saying, why not? Everybody will be equal. But in fact, they ethnically cleansed 95% of the Palestinians who were at that moment citizens of Israel. Yeah, that's this one. About Palestinian families and so on, and children. Yeah, and my colleague, Professor Nader Shalhoub-Korvakian, wrote about unchilding in Palestine, unchilding, how the occupation destroys the childhood of the Palestinian children. That professor met how to say, a tragic end. She was fired by the university and she was arrested by the security services and sent to jail and maltreated, and she was denied medicine during her period in jail and so on and so forth. But anyway, it was because she signed a petition against the killing of children, against mistreating of children, unchilding, what she says. And therefore, yes, children, on the one hand, they are, Palestinians see them as their future. And in fact, you find it in many of peasant societies and many of Oriental societies. For example, in Russia, the elderly people live with the family. In China, people are, the government sends people to jail if they don't visit their parents at least once a week. And this is offense in China because of kind of cultures in these societies. Yeah, and Israel, for sure, but for Israel, there was always the fear of demography, that the Arabs will be more than Jews, and the idea Israel will cease to be a Jewish state. In fact, now there are more non-Jews, Arabs, and Russian immigrants, Christian Russian immigrants, than Jews in Israel. How can Israel be defined as a Jewish state when the majority are not Jews? You know? It's like in Britain, the formal religion or the state religion is Protestantism and the Church of England. But the majority of the English people are either atheists or members of other faith groups. Therefore, the majority is not Protestant anymore in England, as the Jews are not the majority in Israel. Yeah, about Lebanon and violence. I think Lebanon suffered a lot and is paying the price for a long time for supporting the Palestinian cause, and it has civil wars, and a lot of the Americans intervened, the Israelis and so on, and it's really one of the sad stories. At one time, the West thought of Lebanon and it created a Lebanon that they called Paris in the Middle East. It was very sophisticated, and the headquarters of all European companies that dealt with the Middle East were located in Lebanon. But now Lebanon is not playing according to the rules of the masters of the world, and therefore has had to be punished. Now the Lebanese people are not really in bad shape, and probably there will be ceasefire shortly if Israel wishes to with Lebanon. And about Jewish groups who are opposing Israel, opposing the war, I don't think there are many Israelis opposing the war. I think there are few and far between. And the people are angry at Netanyahu because what he brought on them, the results of his deeds. And they are unhappy for the right-wing government and the religious people. And you mentioned the budget. A large portion of the budget goes to religious schools, and these people don't work. You know, I went to the supermarket, and the guy who worked on deliveries told the story that his son came to visit him. His son is religious. Told him, "Father, I think you are a stupid man." And he told him, "How can you say that?" He told him, "Look, we were 5 children. We have 2 rooms, one small room for you and my mother. There were 5 children in one room. We could barely eat. You didn't have money even to feed us. We didn't go to proper schools and so on. But now I do nothing, and only at the end of the month I go to the bank to get my salary. I go to religious school 2 hours, 3 hours a day. I read the Bible. And that's it. This is what I have to do. Why didn't you do the same? And a lot of money goes to the settlements, to the religious groups, and they are growing in Israel and becoming more and more right-wing. And Israel in that way is in trouble. And Netanyahu plays on that. Netanyahu wants to sustain his... also, there is the personal issue that Netanyahu wants to continue ruling Israel. And he finds these people, are natural supporter. And he is very happy with that situation. And doesn't mind really. The people who are fighting against Netanyahu, they hold the same views regarding the Palestinians, the same views regarding the war in Gaza. And in fact, ex-general and an academic in Israel called Yagil Levy published an article in Haasz saying, if we think that the Netanyahu has this genocidal aspirations and practices, we are mistaken. The generals in the army and a large portion of the soldiers who are Ashkenazi, the top of the army, they have the same sentiments as Netanyahu. And this man is general, and he was part of that establishment. Therefore, the protest against Netanyahu, it's because Netanyahu is antagonizing Israelis as a person, his behaviors, and the laws he is passing, and converting Israeli society to a Jewish society. And a lot of people don't want that. For example, in Israel, in order to marry, marriage is done by the religious authority of your faith community. There is no other alternative. Some people don't want to go to the religious leaders or religious functionaries who do this marriages and so on. And in Israel, you can't do it. And also now in Israel, there will be taxes, more taxes, and life is becoming more difficult. I think that's very tough, But no, people are not protesting against Netanyahu because they are pro-peace, unfortunately.
Thank you. Obrigada. Eu concordo com tudo que ele falou, não tenho muita coisa a acrescentar, né, sobre a resistência. Eu tenho contato com algumas organizações, alguns ativistas antisionistas em Israel, mas são muito poucos, né? A gente brincava há 10 anos atrás que a gente, mesmo daqui do Brasil, eu conhecia todos os ativistas antisionistas judeus que existiam. Hoje tem um pouquinho mais, alguns que eu não conheço, mas são muito poucos. Continuam sendo muito poucos, né? E os protestos, né, que a gente vê, que às vezes chega no noticiário, é contra a política do Netanyahu, mas não é contra o genocídio, né? É contra o fato dele não ter ido resgatar, né, os israelenses sequestrados, né? Mas não é contra o assassinato dos palestinos, né? Algumas semanas atrás, eu não sei se vocês chegaram a ver, mas teve uma notícia lá de um podcast de 2 israelenses que falavam que se tivesse um botão que eu apertasse e todos os palestinos sumissem, eu ia apertar esse botão, né? E eram 2 israelenses não religiosos que se dizem de esquerda, né? E falando isso sem nenhuma vergonha, né? Publicamente. E aí depois, quando foram apontados e eles foram pedir desculpa, eles nem sabiam pelo que eles estavam pedindo desculpa, né? É um pedido de desculpa sem pé nem cabeça, assim. Percebe que eles nem se deram conta de quão genocidas eles estavam sendo quando eles dizem que eles apertariam um botão. E esse é o israelense médio, gente. Esse é a grande maioria dos israelenses, é isso. É importante dizer isso. Acho que é só isso que eu queria acrescentar.
Obrigada, Iara. Bom, obrigada a todos. Lembrem amanhã de trazer documento para poder pegar o aparelho para quem precisar da tradução. E até amanhã, às 14h, a gente começa. A sessão das 14h, na verdade, não precisa de tradução, porque são todos falantes do português, mas a partir das 4h, sim, para a questão do documento. Obrigada. Muito obrigada, Ahmad, e muito obrigada, Iara, por essa extraordinária sessão de reflexões.